Yes, I'm Boyle from the Learning Technology Research Institute Director and a very prominent course developer on the British scene here. And as soon as you're ready, you simply go ahead, Tom.
Okay. Actually, I only have a few slides because I don't like to talk about the slides too much. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Clive, for inviting me along here. And I think he set the framework in terms of the Europlot project quite well. And we are supplying one of the tools coming into that. And what I'd like to do is show how the tool both relates to the idea of executable designs. So we can develop more persuasive learning designs, we can build them into the tool. And also how the tool itself is extendable. So if people come back and say, look, it does A but not B, can you build in B? The tool is being built so that that can happen. I'm only going to give a very quick background, which is how we got into this. And GLOW stands for Generative Learning Objects. And the word generative actually comes from generative linguistics, so I'll sort of mention that link in a moment. Very briefly, we started off with learning objects for programming back in 2002. And the reason we started with that was there was a major, certainly national crisis in learning to program. So students were struggling, failing, very high dropout rates. So we started with the pedagogical problem. To cut a long story short, we actually developed both a blended learning program for that, but also a set of learning objects. And they won this European Academic Software Award 2004. That led nicely into an initiative in this country called CETLs, Centres for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. And they were funded quite substantially. So our we got a CETL starting in 2005, and that was funded at just under £3.5 million. It was very substantially funded. And we had three partners. We led it, and we had the University of Cambridge and the University of Nottingham. And that CETL actually developed over 200 multimedia learning objects across a whole very wide range of subject areas. But we also developed this agile development method, which was tutors working in groups with students and multimedia developers to develop these learning objects. Now, how that leads into generative learning objects very quickly is these multimedia learning objects, the agile technique, worked very well. There were three basic problems. One of them was productivity. The tutors needed access to multimedia developers because these were quite rich multimedia resources and we couldn't scale that up. We hadn't enough multimedia developers. The second one was, although we made our learning objects quite small, that tutors, no matter how small we made them, tutors still wanted to change them. So we had to make them adaptable. And the third one was, going back to this agile method, it all really started with pedagogical problems and designs. And then they eventually created the learning objects. And what really looked powerful as a basis for use for the designs. So what we wanted in GLOWmaker was a tool which tutors could use, a design-based tool that would enable them to produce their own multimedia learning objects. And that leads into where we are at the moment. And I was slightly late this morning because we were having a meeting we're extending the tool so that you can also deliver to mobile phones, to smartphones. Okay, so going through, demonstration, right, go straight in then. And I'll just talk through the principles as, I've actually got different versions of the tool on now. We've got a development version, so I better make sure I find the right one, which is here. This is the standard release. By the way, it's free and it's open source. And it will continue to be free and open source. So going in, I can open an existing project, create a new one. There's certain built-in patterns here. And the tool is built so as you create new patterns, you just pick them up as XML files. It will automatically pick them up. So as we work through Europlot, this initial menu will actually extend. So let's pick, this first pattern goes right back to the learning objects and programming. I mentioned they're called generative learning objects. Going back to the original learning objects, I wanted to find, in a sense, the design basis in which they work. And to cut a long story short, I used the analogy from systemic grammar. And systemic grammar sees the deep structure of language is based on functions. It's Halliday. And these get mapped onto the surface forms, the syntax and words you hear. Now that analogy is built into the tool. So what it's saying is that pedagogical patterns have a deep structure, which is the sequence of functions it's trying to achieve, and a surface structure, which is what you see on the screen. And this is built into the tool. So at this level, at the very top level, the basic structure, the basic functional structure of those original learning objects was to introduce a topic. There was this apprehend function. We always showed the students what the piece of software code would do before getting into details, because the details were quite complicated. Then we do the comprehend, the step-by-step explanation. And then it always finished up with a little scaffolded construction exercise, so they could build the code in a nice supported environment before they had to do it for real. Okay, so we've got this, and what's going to happen in a moment is this is going to get mapped on to a series of screen layouts, which are the surface form. But going back to the planner, first thing that comes up is, in a sense, this pattern, for example, is used later, for example, for referencing books. And something like that, people will say, well, look, we don't need apprehend. People know what we're talking about. So what you can do basically is you go in, you select the function, and I can just delete this function because I don't need it. But they wanted to sort of grab the student's attention, and they wanted to explain why they should be doing this. So what I can do is just alter the sort of this top level functional pattern. And there's a little align nodes up here, which just helps to sort them out. So what we've got is a little storyline. Okay, and it's just text basically. It's just text organized in a sort of drag and drop graphical format. What the tool does is it take that pattern. If I go to this designer, what it will now do is map those across to a series of screen layouts. So for example, the introducing the topic, the default is, well, they'll probably want the title and maybe a set of learning objectives. So the default is this screen layout. And you can go through, and each one has a separate layout. And I can illustrate that, for example, if you had a quiz, because quizzes are pretty obvious. So if you wanted to have a quiz at the end, if I go to the designer, you see it's actually set out a little, this is a little component that allows you to very rapidly create a multiple choice quiz. Okay, so going back, I'm going to very quickly show how we use the tool. One other thing is we wanted this design base, so we wanted people to communicate the designs. So in here there's this little pedagogical guidance, and you can switch it on. And for each function it explains what it's about, and there's also this show me how. So you can actually, so I can go in here, it actually explains what it's about, and then there's a further set of explanations here. And there's a little example of what this screen might look like when you're finished. Okay. So let's do something concrete. Let's switch the guidance off. Go to the first screen. Okay, first problem of mapping from function to form. The tutor looks at this and says, fine, I want to introduce something, but I don't want this screen. And that's the way language works. So I might want to ask a question. And if it's French, I might say est-ce que, or I may say avez-vous, it might be the subject-verb inversion. What the French do, when I found out when I first went there after learning School of French, is they just raise the intonation. You know, vous avez. So there's different mappings to form. So someone says, well, look, what I really want here is text plus a picture. Okay. At the bottom, there's two buttons here. One of them says layouts. So I can very rapidly just go, and there's one here called title or image, and I would just effectively do that. The layouts are just a shortcut. I could do, the layouts are just organizations of components. So I could just go on and change the individual component. Right, we tried to make it as user-friendly as possible. So what we've got here is a text component. So I click in that and say this is about buildings. Now if I was a tutor, I'd just leave it like that. I'd probably put the B in capitals, but I'm not interested in how it looks like at the moment. And then I go to the second component, and this component loads pictures. So there's a little browse button down here. Every time you select a component, there's a little function controls here. So I just browse, and I'll pick up a, pick up a picture. Okay, and load it in. Okay, the first thing is the picture stretched, because the actual holder I've put up is wider than the picture. So I can either just go down here and say, maintain aspect ratio, like that. Or if you want, you can just pick, you can just individually adapt it. Just drag it around and shape it up. Okay. And then if I go back up to the text component here, go in, and obviously that's too small, so I might want to make it, say, 36. I might want to center it. I might want to change the color. So we'll try to make it as simple as possible. And then you can go to preview. So that's what I've created so far. And it's very fast, very quick. I may decide, looking at that, for example, well, I actually don't want this box around the text. So I can just go back to the designer, click the text box, go down here, and there's a little button saying border, and I just get rid of that. Okay, so this bit is just to show, to make the tool as user-friendly as possible. What I want to do is then show how certain pedagogical things are built into it. And by the way, you can layer the text above the screen. So if you want to do that, there's a little layering control here. So you can layer the text and so on. It's probably a good idea at this point just to show what happens when you save it, because that's quite important in terms of being a learning object. If I go to File, you've got to save and package. What I'll do is package it. So I just package and I'll put it in the desktop. and make a new folder. And today is Wednesday, so we'll just call it Wednesday test. Do fine. Okay, and I just click OK. And what I'll do is actually close down the tool. Okay. What it's done is created this folder here. Okay, in fact I should write it up here. If I go inside it, it's got a certain structure. So for example, there's a reason why it's a package, and the reason is simply this. This will work on my desktop. If I move it to a web server, it will work. If you move it to your institutional virtual learning environment, it will work. And at the moment, we're moving it to mobile phones, where it will work. Because everything that it needs is contained in the package. And for example, in this little content subdirectory, there's the picture. Okay, so if someone come back and said, I hate your learning object, but I like the picture, it's there for reuse. Okay. What the user sees is you just point to this globe player. So you can use a URL, shortcut, whatever. And of course, that's all I've done at the moment, nothing else. Okay, so I can go back in. Now every globe also has this key file here called project. So if someone produces, going back to the fact that tutors wanted the learning objects to be adaptable, any globe, if I pick it up and say I like that, but I want to change it, if I've downloaded GlowMaker and I say it's free, all I need to do is double click on that and it takes it back in to the tool. So I can go and change it, and I can change the text, change the pictures, add new things and so on. And it's all made as easy as possible. So that's basically about ease of use. But what about a bit more on the sort of pedagogy side? So if I go to, I just go to another pattern. This one called EMI came from, I won't go into all the pattern. I'm going to look at this particular thing here, access views. Okay. And very quickly, I'll give you the background to this. We had, as one of these workshops, we had a group from National Subject Centre for History, Classics and Archaeology. And they wanted a learning object which would get across to their students the idea of multiple interpretations. That knowledge in their subjects isn't factual, it's open to interpretation, there are conflicting interpretations. So what they wanted basically was to be able to load, say, a picture or whatever of an artifact, which would come up here, and then to have a number of speakers and topics and headings like origin, purpose, whatever. And what they want to do is I want to click on origin, ask speaker 1, then compare it to speaker 2 or speaker 3. Okay. Now what we did, now originally they were interested in the altar of Pergamon, and they did produce a learning object. So if you're interested in the altar of Pergamon, you can go and see that. But it's, if you're not, what's interesting here is there's a pattern which is quite powerful and reusable. And we've built that into the tool. And very quickly to show you how we use it. This is a separate component. That's just the picture loading component from before. So let's pick up a picture. That should be fine. Now, if I go into this component, which is the access views one, you always click on the little sort of pencil to go in. Now, of course, the person may want 4 speakers or 5. So I can add speakers here. I can add topics here. So I can have as many topics and speakers as I want. This fits the screen. For the demonstration purposes, well, I just want 2 because it's a lot faster for me. Okay, so I'll go down to 2 speakers and 2 topics. Okay. So what we want are 2 speakers talking about this building. The building, by the way, is the Graduate Centre on London Metropolitan University. The architect was Daniel Libeskind. Okay, but it doesn't matter. It can be anything you want. So if I basically go back in here, let's say you want to talk about the origin of this. So I just type in, so I can do that label a bit. So it might be the origin and okay, where's the and purpose. Okay, so what we want then is we want to ask speaker 1 about the origin. So if I click on speaker 1, now I can change it there. So I can talk about Hebrew expert or whatever. Okay, so I can, but for speed I'll just move through. There are 3 buttons here because this is one of the more complex components. One of them basically says image. So I click here and I go and find an image.